A boy with no name, no kin, not even a hat to block the sun, couldn't amount to much. A ghost vanishing in the dust, but he was the one who lifted her from the dirt when death had nearly taken her. Colt Mercer had lived 16 summers. He owned no land, no family name worth speaking of, and not even a hat to shield him from the baking sun. That August morning he was skirting a ridge above Copper Creek, scouting for jackrabbit, when he spotted the glint. Not silver, not metal, eyes. Down near the arroyo, half buried in red dust, lay a girl no older than himself. Her dress was torn, fringed buckskin stained dark at the thigh. She wasn't dead, not yet, but she weren't far from it either. A raw gash ran along her leg and her breath came shallow. Colt slid down the embankment, heart hammering. His first instinct was to leave. A white boy tangled with an injured native girl. There'd be hell to pay if the wrong eyes saw. But she looked up, and those dark eyes, half-lidded, locked onto his. She reached out, not with fear, but with trust, as if she'd known his face from some forgotten dream. "Hey," he said, kneeling beside her. "You all right?" She didn't answer, just winced and clutched her leg tighter. Colt tore off his sleeve and wrapped the wound quick, hands shaking. He'd learned field bindings from an old miner with one arm. Never thought he'd need 'em like this. She tried to speak, pointed weakly eastward, toward the high mesas where the eagle bones whispered. Colt looked at the rising cliffs and felt the dry wind shift. Whatever she'd run from, or whoever had done this to her, she couldn't stay here. "Well, girl," he muttered, sliding his arm beneath her shoulders, "looks like you and me got a trail to ride." And with that, the boy with nothing became the only thing standing between that girl and the long, hard teeth of death. Colt carried her slow, feet crunching over sun-baked gravel, heart pounding louder than the buzzards circling overhead. The girl weighed little more than a sack of kindling, but the heat made every step feel like dragging a wagon through molasses. He'd passed through this land before, knew the mesas east of Copper Creek led into tribal country. Folks back in Dry Cedar called it Ghost Tooth territory, on account of the strange white rock formations that jutted up like old bones, and on account of how many folks wandered in and never came out. But the girl kept pointing that way, lips parched, eyes flicking open just long enough to show she still had a spark in her. They made it to a rock outcrop by high noon, shade thin as paper, but better than nothing. Colt laid her down careful and trickled the last of his water past her lips. She drank like a wounded fawn, then whispered a single word. "Winona. Is that your name?" he asked. She nodded once. "Well, Winona," Colt muttered, "you picked one hell of a trail." He studied her wound. Dirty, swollen, maybe a day old. Infection was setting in, sure as sunrise. He needed to find herbs, water, maybe even help. But where? No one in town to treat her kind unless it was at the wrong end of a rope. His jaw clenched. "Ain't leaving you," he said aloud, more to himself than her. Then, faint and breathless, she reached into a pouch on her belt and pulled something out. A small carved token, smooth as riverstone. She pressed it into his hand. The symbol on it looked like a sunburst cut by 3 jagged lines. The moment he touched it, the air felt heavier, and just then, Colt heard it. Drum beats, faint and distant. Not thunder, not hooves. Drum beats carried on the wind. Colt crouched low, ears straining. The drumming wasn't from this side of the canyon. It came from deep in the hills, steady, like a heartbeat, like the land itself was waking. He looked at the token again, turning it in his palm. The carvings shimmered faintly in the sun, too fine for any frontier trinket. This was sacred, he reckoned, and now it was his. Winona stirred beside him, eyes fluttering open. Her lips moved, and though her voice was barely a breath, he leaned in close. "Kai," she whispered. "They come." He didn't understand the words, but her fear was plain. Whatever she was talking about, it was already on its way. He glanced toward the east. No dust trails yet, but the wind had turned sharp, carrying the scent of sage and smoke, the kind of air that made horses skittish and grown men uneasy. "We gotta move," Colt muttered. He knelt, slung her arm across his shoulders again, and stood. For 2 more hours he hauled her through thorn brush and dry gullies, past withered cacti and twisted mesquite. At last, just before dusk, they crested a hill and looked down upon a narrow basin shaded by cottonwoods. A stream trickled below, muddy but clean enough to drink. Colt half stumbled to the bank and laid her in the grass. He drank deep, then soaked his kerchief and cooled her brow. Her breathing steadied. That's when he heard it. Hooves. Slow. Deliberate. He turned and froze. At the ridge behind him, silhouetted by the setting sun, sat a lone rider, bare-chested, war paint streaked down his arms, bow resting easy across his lap. His eyes locked on Colt, calm and unblinking. He didn't speak, didn't move. Colt didn't either. The moment hung like thunder before a storm. Colt didn't breathe. The rider remained still, like he was carved from the rock behind him. The only sound was the lazy trickle of the stream and the low whine of cicadas winding down with the day. Winona stirred again, her fingers twitching near her pouch, but Colt covered her hand gently. "Don't," he whispered. "We ain't fightin'." He rose slow, palms open and empty, the token still heavy in his shirt pocket. "She's hurt," he called out. "I just found her. Didn't do nothin'." No answer. The rider didn't so much as blink. Colt took a careful step forward. "You know her, don't you, Winona?" At her name, the rider's eyes narrowed. He nudged his horse forward, descending the ridge like a ghost floating over rock. The stallion moved silent, trained for war. Colt held his ground, heart hammering so loud he thought it might spook the animal. The rider stopped 10 paces away, then spoke in slow, careful English. "Why do you carry her blood?" Colt blinked. I didn't hurt her. She was bleedin' when I found her." The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, eyes never leaving the boy. Then he knelt beside Winona, speaking softly in their tongue. She opened her eyes, saw him, and a tear rolled down her cheek. "Enepe," she whispered. The warrior, Enepe, reached for the token at Colt's chest. Colt flinched, but didn't resist as Enepe pulled it free. The warrior stared at the symbol for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he stood, turned to Colt, and said in a voice like gravel and thunder, "You carry the fire of a broken vow, and now they all will come." Behind them the wind shifted again, and this time Colt heard more hooves. Many more. Colt turned toward the sound. Coming out of the east, where the mesas touched the sky, rose a dust, cloud-wide as the valley itself. Through it he saw flickers, glints of metal, flashes of feathers, silhouettes on horseback, riders, a war party. His mouth went dry. Enepe stood motionless, token still in his hand. "They ride for her," he said quietly. "And now, for you." Colt stepped back. "I didn't ask for this. I just helped her." Enepe nodded once. "And that is why they come." Winona murmured something in their tongue. Enepe knelt again, pressed his forehead to hers, then rose. His voice turned hard. "She is daughter to Chief Chayton, and that token," he held it up, "it is given only by blood right. You took her pain, her path. That means you are marked." Colt shook his head. "I ain't no warrior. I'm just a kid sleeping in gullies and stealing biscuits." Enepe's eyes flicked to the ridge. "Doesn't matter what you were, matters what you are now." The riders emerged from the dust like spirits, 50 strong, paint on their faces, lances tipped with sunlight. A banner rose among them, dark red with a single white stone at its center. Colt backed toward Winona instinctively. "What do I do?" Enepe didn't answer. He stepped away and raised both hands high. The warriors slowed, then stopped in formation, forming a crescent on the slope. One man rode forward alone, a tall figure draped in ceremonial cloth, a curved staff across his back, and eyes older than the land itself. "Chief Chayton," Enepe said, bowing his head. The chief looked past him, right at Colt. "You brought my daughter home," he said, voice like distant thunder. Now speak, ghost boy. Tell me why you risked death for a girl who was not yours." Colt's knees nearly buckled under the weight of those words, but he met Chayton's gaze and said, "Because she needed help." A silence fell, heavy, waiting, and then Chayton dismounted. Chief Chayton stood a head taller than any man Colt had ever seen, not just in height, but in presence. His hair was streaked with gray, his eyes dark as wet stone. He walked with slow purpose, the same way thunder rolls in before a storm. Colt tried not to flinch as the chief approached. He could feel every warrior's gaze boring into him like arrowheads. Chayton looked at Winona, then back to the boy. "You carried her," he said, "through gulches full of snakes, across outlaw land." "Why?" Colt swallowed. "Because leaving her there felt wrong. No one else was gonna help." The chief's brow furrowed, not with anger, but with something deeper, thought. He turned to Enepe and spoke in their tongue. Enepe answered with a short, firm reply. Then Chayton stepped closer. "You carry her token," the chief said. "That makes you bloodbound. Her fate became yours the moment you accepted it." "I didn't know what it meant," Colt said, voice low. "But you still took it," Chayton said, "and did not throw it away." The chief raised the stone token high so all his warriors could see. Then he declared, "This boy is under our protection. He carries the mark of Fire Elk, by choice, not birth. That makes him kin." A murmur passed through the gathered warriors, some nodding, some scowling. Colt felt like the ground beneath him had shifted. "Kin?" he whispered. Winona smiled faintly, her voice a rasp. "You saved me. Now, they save you." Enepe stepped beside the chief. "But it is not done. There is more." Chayton nodded grimly. "The men who wounded her, they are not far. They ride under no flag, taking what they want. They think no one will chase them. They are wrong." Colt looked between them. "You're going after 'em?" "You are too," Chayton said. Colt blinked. "Me?" The chief looked to the east where shadows stretched long. "They'll run into settler land. That means we cannot follow. But you can." The words hit like a gunshot. "They will not expect the boy who saved a chief's daughter to be hunting them." Colt stared at the token in his hand, and in that moment he realized his life had just changed forever. Night settled like smoke over the basin, stars blinking through a canvas of black. The warriors lit no fires, not out of fear, but purpose. Silence was their shield. Every man moved with the stillness of stone. Colt sat beside the stream, the token in his palm, its carved edges warm against his skin. He hadn't spoken for a while, not since Chayton had told him what was expected. Across the camp, the chief stood alone, hands clasped behind his back. Enepe approached Colt with a leather-wrapped bundle and set it gently before him. "What's this?" Colt asked, already guessing. "Your tools," Enepe said. "If you're hunting men, you'll need more than luck." Inside lay a short rifle, well-oiled and silent as a prayer, and a knife with bone inlaid into its handle. Beside them, a pouch of dried herbs and a canteen. Colt looked up. "You really think I can do this?" Enepe's gaze didn't waver. "Doesn't matter what I think. You must believe." Winona, now sitting up under a woven blanket, called softly to him. He crossed to her, crouched at her side. "I should go with you," she whispered, voice still weak. "No," Colt said, shaking his head. "You've done enough. Rest now." She reached out, touched the token at his neck. "That stone is part of a story, and stories don't end until someone writes the last line." He felt the weight of it then. Not just the stone, but the expectation, the danger, the honor. At dawn, Enepe and Chayton brought him to the edge of the canyon. From here the trail forked. One led west toward town, the other vanished into outlaw country. Chayton pointed west. "They ride under a man named Burke Rawlins, killer of women. He thinks no one follows. Colt swallowed hard. He's about to find out different. Chayton laid a hand on his shoulder, firm and final. Ride fast, ghost boy. The spirit of Fire Elk watches now. Colt mounted the painted horse they'd given him, took one last look at Winona's pale face in the shadows, then rode into the rising sun. Colt rode hard, wind whistling past his ears, the desert sun turning everything gold and cruel. The horse, a strong mare named Kinta, moved with purpose, as if she understood the burden on the boy's shoulders. By noon, he reached Blackroot Wash, a narrow gorge where outlaws often passed like ghosts. The sand there bore fresh tracks. 3 riders, one of them dragging something heavy. Colt dismounted, crouched low, boot prints. Scuffed. Someone was injured. He found a broken canteen and a scrap of cloth snagged on a mesquite thorn. It was gray with a red stripe. Army issue. Rollins wasn't just any outlaw. He'd killed soldiers. Men like that didn't run. They circled back, set traps. Colt pressed on, quieter now, rifle in hand. By dusk, he reached a bluff that overlooked an old mining camp long abandoned. He tethered Kinta in the scrub and crawled forward on his belly. Below, the outlaws had built a fire, small, hidden between rocks. There were 3 of them, just like Chayton said. One, tall, wide-shouldered, with a hat like a preacher and a rifle across his lap. Burke Rollins. The other 2 looked nervous. One was bleeding from the side. The other paced, muttering. "You think they'll come after us?" the pacer asked. Rollins spat into the dirt. "Not with what we done. No tribe's fool enough to stir the army's hornet nest. We'll be over the border by sunrise." Colt backed away slow, mind racing. They weren't moving fast. They felt safe. That meant he had time to get ahead, lay a trap of his own. He returned to his horse, but just as he reached for the reins, a voice whispered from the darkness, "You're not the only one hunting, boy." Colt spun, rifle raised. A shadow stepped from behind a rock, lean, wiry, wearing a sheriff's badge dulled by dust. "I've been tracking Rollins for a month," the stranger said. "Name's Roy Calhoun. And I ain't here to stop you." He nodded toward the camp. "I'm here to finish what I started." Colt kept the rifle steady, eyes narrowing. "You a lawman or bounty hunter?" Roy Calhoun stepped into the moonlight, his face sharp as flint. One eye was clouded white, blind, but the other burned with a hunter's fire. "Used to wear the tin," he said, tapping the badge pinned to his duster. "Marshal out of Red Hollow. That was before Rollins gunned down my deputy and rode off with Army gold." Colt lowered the barrel, but just a hair. "What makes you think I won't tell the tribe you're tailing them to?" Calhoun smiled, dry and cold. "Because you ain't stupid. And because I heard what you did for that girl." Colt stiffened. Calhoun nodded toward the canyon below. "Rollins close. We take him now, he dies fast. No justice. No answers. You want him alive? I want him afraid." Calhoun growled. "I want him to know who's coming." Colt glanced at the fire flickering far below, his jaw tight. He hurt her, left her in the dirt like she wasn't nothing. "And now you want vengeance." Colt didn't answer, but his grip on the rifle said plenty. Calhoun reached into his coat and tossed something into Colt's hands. A folded parchment, stained at the edges. "Marshal Crawford's bounty writ," Calhoun said. "Was gonna serve it before Rollins shot him in the back. Thought you should know the kind of devil you're dealing with." Colt opened it. Rollins' name burned across the top like a brand. Crimes listed like a sermon of sin. Murder, theft, abduction. 5 towns. 3 territories. Colt folded it slow. "So what's your plan?" Calhoun grinned like a man staring down death with a loaded pistol. "Same as yours, I reckon. Hunt him down and make sure the story don't end with him smiling." They shook hands in silence. Above them, the stars looked down, watching the moment 2 ghosts of the frontier made a pact under heaven's eye. Colt and Calhoun waited till the moon was high before slipping down the bluff. They moved like shadows, keeping low between rocks and sagebrush, every step measured. Down below, Rollins and his men sat around the dying fire, unaware the desert was watching. "I'll circle wide," Calhoun whispered. "Flush 'em toward the arroyo. That's where you take your shot." Colt nodded, nerves taut like a drawn bowstring. He slipped east, crawling through scrub and stone, heart beating in time with the cicadas. Rollins's voice floated up in the dark, full of swagger and venom. "They're too scared to come. Ain't no law left out here, boys. Just dust and graves." The younger outlaw chuckled. "Then we keep the gold and the girl's necklace, yeah?" Colt froze. They'd taken Winona's necklace. He gritted his teeth. That necklace, woven silver and turquoise, wasn't just trinket. It was a blood right, passed from her mother. The kind of thing you'd kill for or die keeping. A twig snapped across the camp. Calhoun's signal. Rollins turned his head. What was that? The wounded outlaw reached for his pistol, but too slow. Calhoun fired once, sharp and clean, sending him sprawling into the dust. Chaos broke loose. Rollins grabbed his rifle and bolted for the arroyo. The last outlaw followed, but Colt stepped from the brush, rifle raised. "Drop it." The second man skidded to a halt, cursed, and swung his weapon. Too late. Colt shot him clean in the shoulder. He went down screaming. Rollins didn't stop. He ran, rifle slung, feet pounding the dry wash. Colt gave chase, fury burning in his chest. The arroyo narrowed. Rollins wheeled, raised his rifle. Colt dove behind a boulder as the bullet sparked past. Dust choked the air. "You don't want to do this, boy," Rollins shouted. "I'll bury you where no one remembers your name." Colt stepped out. "I never had a name to begin with," he growled, and fired. Rollins' rifle flew from his hands. The outlaw stumbled backward, hit the rocks hard, and still tried to crawl. Colt stood over him, breath ragged, rifle leveled. "You hurt her," he said. Rollins spat blood. "She was in the way." "No," Colt said. "You were." Rollins groaned on the rocky floor of the arroyo, one hand clutching his shoulder, the other scrabbling uselessly at the dust. His eyes, wild, sunken, desperate, met Colt's, and for the first time the outlaw looked afraid. "You gonna shoot me in the dirt, boy?" he spat. "That how it ends?" Colt lowered the rifle slightly, but didn't take his eyes off him. "I ought to." Calhoun dropped down from the bluff behind them, boots crunching on gravel. "Wouldn't blame you," he said. "Man like him don't deserve mercy." Rollins laughed bitterly, winced. "Mercy's for fools. You think killing me changes what I done?" Colt crouched beside him, eyes narrow. "No, but it stops you from doing worse." He reached into Rollins's coat and pulled out the necklace, Winona's. Silver glinted with a piece of turquoise still stained with dried blood. Colt's hand tightened around it. "Where'd you get this?" Rollins sneered. "Took it off her when she couldn't scream no more. Thought it'd sell in Sonora." Colt stood, breathing hard. Calhoun stepped forward, tossing a pair of cuffs into the dust. He rides to Chayton's camp, stands before the ones he wronged, and they decide what's fair. Rollins laughed again, bitter as poison. "You think they'll show trial? You deliver me to savages, you'll all hang." Calhoun leveled his pistol. "Then we all hang." Colt stared down at the outlaw, then looked east, where the fire elk waited, where Winona healed. "She gave me her token," he said. "That makes me her voice." Rollins's laughter died. "So if I say you walk to that camp and face what's coming," he chambered a fresh round, "then you walk." The outlaw tried to rise, but Calhoun yanked him up, bound his wrists tight and gave him a push. "Start moving." As they marched through the canyon, moonlight on their backs and justice in their shadow, Colt knew this was far from over. Retribution had a long memory, and the fire elk would not forget. The sun crept over the ridges as they approached the tribal encampment. The land felt quiet, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Rollins stumbled between Colt and Calhoun, wrists bound, face bruised and bleeding. His mouth ran dry, but his pride kept him from asking for water. At the edge of the basin, warriors emerged like ghosts from stone and shadow. They formed a silent corridor. No jeers, no spit, no threat. Just eyes that had seen loss and remembered every face who'd caused it. Rollins tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. Chayton stepped forward, flanked by Enipai and 3 elders draped in ceremonial cloth. Behind them, Winona sat, wrapped in a white furred robe, her eyes locked on Rollins with steady fire. "Is this the one?" Chayton asked, voice like rolling thunder. Colt nodded once. He bragged about taking her necklace. Left her for dead. Rollins smirked. "You ain't law, you got no right." Chayton's gaze cut through him. "You crossed sacred land. You bled sacred blood. We don't need your law to know justice." The warriors encircled the clearing, forming a perfect ring of silence. Calhoun stepped back, eyes on Colt. Chayton turned to the boy. "You carried her across the dust, faced fire and wolves. Her life became yours. Now, her justice is yours to speak." Colt looked at Winona. Her nod was small, but full of weight. Her eyes shone, not with vengeance, but hope. "I say this man lives," Colt said, his voice steady. "But he carries the mark of what he's done. He stands trial, your trial, and tells every town from here to Red Hollow what happens when you cross the Fire Elk." A murmur rippled through the circle. Chayton nodded slowly. "It is spoken." Enipai stepped forward, pulled Rollins' shirt aside, and carved a line of red paint across his chest. A mark seen in every tribe across the plains. The mark of shame, of debt never paid. "Wherever you ride, they will know," Enipai said. "You are not feared. You are judged." Rollins sagged, defeated. As the sun rose higher, Colt stood in the center of that ancient ring, no longer a ghost, but something else entirely. That night the Fire Elk gathered under a sky thick with stars, the air humming with old songs. Drums thudded like the earth's own heartbeat. Smoke from the ceremonial fire curled into the heavens, sweet with cedar and sage. Colt sat near the flames, his hands still stained with trail dust and blood. Yet no one looked at him as a stranger now. Chayton approached with slow, deliberate steps, a bundle in his arms. Enipai and Winona followed, silent but sure. "You crossed into our story," Chayton said, his voice echoing in the hush. "You carried fire through enemy ground and brought back more than justice. You brought balance." He looked around the circle. The boy had no name when he came. "But the spirits have spoken." Winona stepped forward, holding a strip of bark with symbols etched deep. She handed it to Colt. "From this day," she said softly, "you are Tawitika, he who stands in fire." The crowd murmured in approval. Some nodded solemn. Others beat the drums harder. Colt looked down at the name carved in ancient letters, his throat tight. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. Chayton laid a hand on his shoulder. "Then say nothing. Just listen." The drums shifted. Voices rose. A chant took hold. Low, rhythmic, rising with the wind. "Tawitika." They were singing his name. Later, by the dying embers, Winona sat beside him. "You could go back," she said, "to your old life." He looked toward the dark horizon. "There's nothing back there but shadows." She nodded. "Then stay. Make something new." He looked at her, her strength, her fire, and saw a path he hadn't dared dream. Colt Mercer, the boy no one claimed, had found something worth standing for, and now he had a name to carry with pride. Days passed beneath the desert sky, each one quieter than the last, but not without purpose. The Fire Elk moved like wind through the rocks, hunting, healing, preparing. Yet even in peace, the memory of blood lingered in the dust. Colt, Tawitka now, had begun to learn their ways. He practiced with bow and horse, listened to elders tell stories etched in flame. The name they gave him wasn't just words, it was weight, and he carried it every step. One morning, As he tended the horse Kinta near the ravine, Winona approached. Her limp was gone now, though a scar crossed her leg like a warning from the past. "They say the cavalry's comin'," she said softly. Colt looked up. "For Rollins?" She nodded. "They found blood in Blackroot Wash, found the trail, and they know he passed through tribal lands." He stood, dusting off his hands. "They'll blame the fire elk." Winona's eyes darkened. "Even though you brought him in." He looked east, where the horizon trembled with heat. "Then I reckon I ride out and tell them myself." She frowned. "You'll face a captain who don't know you from a rattler. You could be shot before you open your mouth." "Maybe," Colt said, "but I've ridden through worse." Inepe met him as he saddled Kinta. "You sure?" Colt gave a tight nod. "If they think we're still at war, they'll come with guns. This piece ain't bought. It's guarded." Chayton stepped from his tent, watching silently as the boy-turned-brother mounted up. "You ride as one of us now," he said. Colt nodded once. "And I'll speak like it." As the camp faded behind him and the long ride to the cavalry outpost began, Colt knew one truth deeper than the rest. Sometimes a name ain't just given. Sometimes you earn it. The cavalry post sat on a rise where the land turned from scrub to dust, flags snapping in the dry wind. As Colt approached, rifles bristled from behind barricades. A soldier shouted, "Rider approaching! Alone!" He slowed Kinta to a walk, hands raised, token around his neck glinting in the sun. Two men rode out, one young and nervous, the other older, wearing an officer's coat and a face carved from war. "Name?" barked the officer. "Colt Mercer," he replied. "Or Tawitika, if you'd rather use what the fire elk gave me." The officer frowned. "You're the one brought in Rollins?" Colt nodded. "Alive!" Faced judgment by the tribe for what he did. "He carries the mark now. You'll find him at Dry Creek Crossing, shackled and waitin'." The officer's gaze sharpened. "And what proof do we have the tribe didn't just kill him and hang the blame on others?" Colt reached into his coat, pulled the folded bounty writ signed by Marshal Crawford. "This, and my word." The officer studied it, then looked Colt in the eye. "You're just a boy." "No, sir," Colt said calmly. "I was a boy when I left, but the desert made a man out of me." A long silence passed. Then the officer muttered, "We'll investigate. If this is true, it might change things." Colt leaned forward in the saddle. "Change starts with listening. You do that, and maybe the next fire elk don't ride with a rifle." He turned without another word and rode off, the wind lifting behind him. Back at the mesas, the tribe waited. And far across the hills, campfire stories already began, of a nameless drifter who helped a wounded girl and woke the fire of 50 warriors with nothing but kindness. They say his name was Colt Mercer, but the fire elk remember him as Tawitika, the boy who stood in fire.